They thought I was there to take notes. I was there to decide if the contract got signed. My brother-in-law had been telling that joke for 3 years. "Here comes the government girl," he'd say whenever I walked into a family gathering, miming shuffling papers with both hands. Haha, everyone laughed, including my sister. My mother would smile that particular smile of hers, the one that meant, "Please don't make this a thing," and I would set my purse down and ask if anyone needed a drink. I had gotten very good at being the punchline. "My name is Audrey. I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a federal contracts attorney for the Department of Defense. I negotiate procurement agreements. I sit across tables from defense contractors, aerospace companies, and occasionally foreign governments, and I make sure the American taxpayer doesn't get robbed blind. I have signed off on agreements worth more than most people will earn in several lifetimes. I hold a security clearance that would make most people's eyes water if they knew the number attached to it. My family thought I worked in an office and filed paperwork. To be fair, I never corrected them. When my mother asked what I did exactly, I said contracts law for the federal government. When she pressed, I said it was complicated and boring. She seemed relieved. My father nodded and asked if the benefits were good. I said yes, the benefits were very good. My sister Meredith had already moved on to talking about her fiancé's promotion at his commercial real estate firm, and that was that. That had been 3 years ago at Christmas dinner. The topic of my career had not come up meaningfully since. Meredith got engaged 14 months ago to a man named Cooper. He is handsome in the way that men who played lacrosse in college are handsome. Confident, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that fills a room and an opinion about everything. He had opinions about my career the first time we met. "Federal government," he'd repeated, leaning back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who had never once doubted his own value in any room. "So basically, you're on the clock no matter what, 9 to 5, benefits, pension. Pretty cushy." He said it like a compliment. It was not a compliment. I smiled and said something noncommittal. I was good at that too. The wedding was set for the third Saturday in April. It was a big event, 240 guests, a venue outside of Alexandria, Virginia. One of those restored plantation-style properties with white columns and manicured grounds and a tent the size of a small aircraft hangar. Meredith had been planning it for over a year. There was a coordinator, a florist, a separate person just for the cake. My mother had been involved in every decision and had the air of a woman who had spent 14 months preparing for the most important performance of her life. I was a bridesmaid. That should have been enough. I was standing at the altar next to my sister in the dusty rose dress she'd chosen, holding a bouquet of white peonies. But Meredith had a way of making me feel like a supporting character, even when I was physically present in the scene. It started at the rehearsal dinner. We were at a long table at a restaurant in Georgetown. Exposed brick, candlelight, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices. Cooper's family was there, his parents, his older brother and sister-in-law, 2 cousins, an uncle who kept making toasts. My family was there, my parents, my aunt and uncle from Baltimore, and me. There were also several of Cooper's colleagues, men and women from his firm, from his golf club, from various corners of his professional life that I hadn't been briefed on. I was seated near the end of the table, between my aunt and a woman named Diane, who worked with Cooper in commercial real estate and had the energy of someone who had been to a lot of these dinners and had no intention of being impressed by this one. At some point during the entree course, the conversation shifted to careers. This happens at these dinners. Someone mentions what they do, someone else tops it, and then the table organizes itself into a rough hierarchy based on income and perceived status. Cooper's brother was a cardiologist. One of the cousins worked in finance in New York. Diane was a partner at a development firm. My aunt and uncle had a landscaping business in Baltimore that they were very proud of. Then Cooper's mother, a neat woman named Glenda, who wore a single strand of pearls and asked questions the way a prosecutor asks questions, turned to me. "Audrey, what is it you do again? Meredith mentioned you work for the government." Before I could answer, Meredith laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. That's the thing. It was a fond, exasperated laugh, the kind you use to describe a family member who refuses to upgrade their phone or still watches network TV. She processes contracts, Meredith said. Federal contracts. She's basically a very well-trained paper pusher. She said it warmly, the way you describe something endearing. We've been trying to get her to go private for years. She could make 3 times the salary. The table laughed politely. My mother smiled her smile. My aunt said I was very dedicated. Glenda nodded as if the matter had been settled. I took a sip of water. The thing about being good at your job, at my specific job, is that you learn to read a room. You learn when to speak and when to let something sit. You learn that the moment right after someone has underestimated you is often the most valuable moment you have, and that spending it on an explanation is almost always a waste. I let it sit. The wedding itself was on a Saturday morning, clear and unseasonably warm. By 11 o'clock, the tent was nearly full. I stood at the altar in my dusty rose dress and watched my sister float down the aisle on my father's arm, and I thought, she looks genuinely happy. Whatever else was true, that was true. She was beaming in a way I hadn't seen her beam since we were kids, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. The ceremony was beautiful. Cooper cried a little when he saw her, which I had not expected, and I revised my opinion of him upward slightly. The reception was where things started. I was at the wedding party table during the first hour. The drinks, the past appetizers, the receiving line that seemed to last forever. I talked to people. I was good company when I wanted to be. Someone asked where I was based, and I said the DC area. They asked what I did, and I said law and left it there. Around the second hour, during the cocktail portion before the seated dinner, I found myself in a small cluster near the bar with my mother, Glenda, and 2 of Cooper's colleagues, a man named Fletcher and a woman named Rosalind, both from his firm. They were in the middle of a conversation about the DC real estate market when I joined them, and then somehow, the way these things happen, the conversation turned to the government, specifically to government contracts, specifically to a large federal procurement that Fletcher apparently had opinions about. The whole system is a black box, he was saying. You have no idea who's making the decisions. Some bureaucrat in a basement somewhere stamping papers, and that's it. No accountability. No transparency. My brother-in-law's company bid on a DoD contract last year. 8 months of process, hundreds of thousands in preparation costs, and they just didn't get it. 0 explanation. He shook his head. The whole thing needs to be privatized. I knew the contract he was describing. I knew it because I had been on the team that evaluated it. I knew exactly why his brother-in-law's company hadn't gotten it. I did not say any of this. My mother was nodding along sympathetically. Glenda said something about bureaucracy. Rosalind made a polite noise of agreement. Then Meredith appeared at my shoulder. She had been moving through the crowd doing the rounds, glowing, and she slid into our small circle with the ease of someone who had been the center of every room for most of her life. "What are we talking about?" she asked. "Government contracts," Fletcher said. Meredith made a face, a cheerful, exaggerated grimace. "Oh no," she said. "Don't tell me. Audrey's become the expert on everything federal." She laughed and put her hand on my arm, squeezing it. "My sister would know. She's been in government so long, she probably has a pension and a motorized chair." The people around her laughed. I keep telling her she's brilliant enough to go somewhere she'd actually get paid what she's worth. But she's very loyal. She said loyal the way people say loyal when they mean stubborn, or limited, or afraid. I looked at my sister. Her hand was still on my arm. She was smiling at me with genuine affection, which made it somehow worse, because she was not being malicious. She genuinely, earnestly believed what she was saying. She thought she was complimenting me by saying I was loyal. She thought she was helping me by telling a room full of her husband's professional contacts that I was a paper pusher with a motorized chair. "Thank you," I said. That was all. Meredith kissed my cheek and moved on, sweeping Glenda away with her. The small cluster dispersed. I got a glass of wine and found a table near the edge of the tent where I could see the whole room. I was not angry. That surprised me, actually. I had been angry before, in my 20s, when this pattern had first become clear to me. When I'd started to understand that my family had a particular story they told about me, and that the story wasn't about who I was, but about who they needed me to be. The manageable one, the stable one, the one with the government job and the benefits and the motorized chair, content to watch from the sidelines while Meredith had the wedding and the dress and the 240 guests. I had done a lot of work in therapy to stop being angry about it. What I felt, sitting at the edge of the tent with my wine, was something more like tired. A specific kind of tired that I think only comes from being known by people who are not actually seeing you. The seated dinner began at 6. I was back at the wedding party table. Toasts happened. Cooper's best man, my mother, an old college friend of Meredith's who cried through most of hers. The food was excellent. I talked to the groomsman next to me, a cheerful man named Walt who worked in urban planning and had very strong opinions about infrastructure, and I found I liked him considerably. I had almost relaxed. Then someone at the table, one of Cooper's cousins, I think, leaned across and said to me, "Hey, so you're in federal law? Do you work near the Capitol?" Before I can answer, Cooper's mother said pleasantly, "She does contract administration, I believe." Filing. It wasn't hostile. That was the honest truth of it. It was the same energy as the rehearsal dinner. She had filed me in the relevant drawer, and she was just confirming the label. I put down my fork. I was not going to say anything. I had decided that. This was Meredith's wedding day, and I had decided that. This was Meredith's wedding day, and I had decided that. But then Meredith, who had been half listening from 2 seats down, leaned in with that same warm, laughing energy and said, "She basically keeps the lights on for some little office in Crystal City. Very important stapling." And she laughed, and Cooper laughed, and his mother smiled, and the table moved on. Very important stapling. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the tent, where the fabric walls gave way to the open evening air. There was a garden behind the venue, lit with small lights strung through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes by myself in my dusty rose dress, and I thought about everything I had decided not to say over the past 3 years. I thought about the 8-figure procurement I had renegotiated 18 months ago that had been flagged as structurally compromised. A contractor padding line items across 17 subcontracts in a way that would have gone undetected for years if I hadn't gone through the numbers manually over a holiday weekend. I thought about the deposition I'd sat for in connection with that case, the one I couldn't talk about, where the opposing attorney had spent 4 hours trying to rattle me and had not succeeded. I thought about my clearance level and the committee briefing I'd attended 6 weeks ago and the 3 emails currently sitting in my encrypted inbox that I had not yet had time to address because I had taken a long weekend off to be a bridesmaid. And I thought, nobody here has any idea. Not because I was hiding it exactly. I had just never found the right moment. Or maybe I'd never tried hard enough to find the right moment. Or maybe some part of me had decided a long time ago that people who needed the explanation didn't deserve it, and people who deserved it didn't need it. I went back inside. The toasts were wrapping up. The DJ was setting up. The cake was being cut at a table near the back. I found my seat and poured myself more water and smiled at Walt, who was telling me about a light rail project in Phoenix that he found genuinely exciting. Then Cooper stood up. He tapped his glass, that particular sound that makes every conversation in a tent go quiet. He had already given a toast during the formal remarks, so people looked up with mild curiosity rather than full attention. He was not holding note cards. He was holding his glass in one hand and looking around the room with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something quieter than his usual register. "One more thing," he said. "Before we get to the dancing, I want to say something about Audrey." The tent went very still. I did not move. "Most of you don't know what Audrey does," he said. "Her family doesn't know what Audrey does. I know, because—" He paused, and something flickered across his face. "Because about 6 months ago I was in a meeting." He let that sit for a second. "I'm in commercial real estate. Some of you know I've been working on a large mixed-use development project. Government-adjacent, federal funding components. We had to go through a federal contracts process. And I was at a pre-award meeting, and sitting across the table from me and my team was the government's lead negotiator. He looked at me. It was Audrey. The tent was completely quiet. I didn't put it together for about 45 minutes, he said, because she introduced herself by her title, not by her first name. And her title is, he paused again, and this time the pause had weight, Senior Counsel, Office of Defense Procurement. And she had a team of 4 attorneys with her, and she had clearly read everything we'd submitted, every line, every footnote, and she proceeded to identify 3 structural issues in our proposed agreement that my own team had missed. He shook his head slightly, like he was still processing it. She was the most prepared person in that room, and when she left, the head of our legal team, 30-year veteran, seen everything, leaned over to me and said, "That woman is very good at her job." Meredith was looking at me. My mother was looking at me. Cooper raised his glass. "Audrey, on behalf of everyone who ever called it filing, I apologize, and I am profoundly grateful that you are in the family." He paused. "Ma'am," he inclined his head. Not quite a bow, but close enough. The tent started clapping. Not politely, genuinely. Walt next to me let out a low whistle. Fletcher, 2 tables over, had gone the color of the tablecloth. I didn't cry. I am not a person who cries easily, and I had spent years training whatever impulse was left out of my face in professional settings. But I felt something in my chest that I didn't have a clean word for. Something like grief and relief and exhaustion all at once. Like a door that had been closed for a long time had just opened, and I wasn't sure whether to walk through it. I looked at my sister. Meredith was not performing. That was the first thing I noticed. She wasn't laughing it off or casting around for something to say that would recalibrate the moment in her favor. She was just sitting there, her hands folded on the table in front of her, looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. She looked like she was figuring something out. I stood up, eventually. I walked to where she was sitting, and she stood, and we looked at each other for a moment in the middle of her wedding reception, while 240 people pretended not to watch. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. And she meant it. There was no blame in it. Or at least she was trying for no blame, and the effort showed in the particular way her voice caught at the end. "You never asked," I said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth." She looked down at her bouquet, which she was still holding, and then back up at me. "I thought I knew you," she said. "You do know me," I said. "You just didn't know what I did." And then she hugged me. And I let her. The DJ started playing something with a good beat, and Cooper appeared beside us and put an arm around both our shoulders and said something so relentlessly cheerful about dancing that we both laughed in spite of ourselves. And the moment dissolved into the general noise and movement of a very good party. I danced. I had not expected to dance, but Walt turned out to be enthusiastic, if not technically skilled, and there is something about a tent full of people who are genuinely celebrating that is difficult to resist, even when you came in prepared to be the sad one in the corner. My mother found me, near the end of the evening, during a slow song I was sitting out. She sat down next to me without saying anything for a moment. She is a woman who has always used silence as a kind of statement, and I waited. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I said. "I should have asked," she said. I looked at her. She was not making excuses. That was something, and I wanted to give it the credit it deserved. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." She nodded. She had the posture of a woman who was deciding whether to say something else. Then she said, "Your father is going to want a full explanation." I laughed, an actual surprised laugh. "I'm sure he is," I said. She patted my hand once, efficiently, the way she did, and then stood up and went to find him. I watched her go. The lights in the trees swayed a little in the spring wind. Somewhere on the dance floor, Meredith was laughing at something Cooper had said, her head thrown back, her dress catching the light. She looked happy. She was happy. And whatever had been wrong between us, not just tonight but for years, the long, slow accumulation of being seen incorrectly, it wasn't fixed. You don't fix something like that in one evening. But something had shifted. The door was open. What happened next was up to both of us. I drove back to my apartment in DC a little after midnight. I changed out of the dusty rose dress, which I had to admit had been more comfortable than I'd expected. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet of a Saturday night turning into Sunday morning, and I thought about all of it. My phone had 17 new texts. Most were from cousins and aunts I hadn't spoken to in months. A few were from work contacts who apparently had been at the wedding or knew people who were. One was from the groomsman, Walt, which surprised me, and which said simply, "Infrastructure nerd, turned out to be a pretty good time, I hope." "Glad to meet you, Audrey." I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling. I had spent a long time, longer than I want to admit, being angry at my family for not seeing me. And then I'd spent a while being quietly, carefully fine with it. Because the alternative was exhausting and I had a job that required everything I had. And somewhere in there I had stopped asking myself whether I wanted to be known, whether I was willing to do the work of letting people in, not just professionally, but personally, whether the wall I'd built between my two lives was protecting me or just keeping everyone at a comfortable distance, so nothing could disappoint me. That's the thing about being very good at managing other people's expectations. You can turn it on yourself without meaning to. Cooper had done something I hadn't asked him to do, and it had changed the shape of the room in a way that couldn't be undone. And I was grateful. Genuinely. Unexpectedly grateful. But I also knew that whatever happened next was not about what anyone else said or didn't say. It was about whether I was willing to show up as the whole person. Not just the attorney, not just the sister in the corner with the motorized chair joke. All of it. I texted Walt back. I finished my tea. I opened my laptop and looked at the 3 encrypted emails I hadn't answered and decided they could wait until Monday. Then, I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to sleep. I had a meeting at 8 on Monday. I was the most prepared person in the room. As always.